Have you been considering picking up watercolors but aren't quite sure where to get started? Well, then this is the video for you. Today, in part 1 of my Intro to Watercolor series, I'll be covering the basics of paints, paper, and brushes. Let's get started. So when you're first looking at watercolor paints, you'll probably notice it comes in 2 different forms. It can either come in pans like this or in tubes like this. Now, these are both Winsor and Newton, and these are both Artist Quality. So there is no real difference in, permanent rose that comes in a half pan like this or in a permanent rose that comes in a tube like this. Some brands like Winsor and Newton do have some small differences between the pans and the tubes. But the major difference really is the half pan comes in a nice little portable container like this, and the tube will have wet paint inside that needs to be squeezed out and stored somewhere. A lot of people find pans more portable. They're a little bit easier. With the tubes, generally you need to squeeze out the paint, wait for it to dry a bit before you start using it. That's up to you. You can always paint with it wet, but that's probably not the most cost-effective way of using your paint because you'll end up using a lot of it. But I prefer tubes these days. I like, being able to squeeze out, control how much paint I use. I also find they re-wet a little bit better, but that might just be me. So yeah, if you're looking between pans and tubes, no right answer here. It's just what you prefer and how you like to paint. If you're first starting out, I think pans are probably a little bit easier, but it's really up to you. The next thing I want to think about is the quality of your watercolors. A lot of brands, watercolor brands, will have 2 tiers. They'll have their artist tier and their student tier. The main difference between the artist and student tiers are, well, besides price, is the amount of pigment versus filler in them, as well as the quality of the pigments. So artist quality paints will have higher quality pigments. So here you have 2 Winsor and Newton palettes. On the left-hand side, this is a palette of their professional paints, and this is their student line, which is called Cotman. Which one you go for is up to you. The artist paints definitely do perform better. There is a noticeable difference, especially as you move further down your watercolor journey. You will be able to see the difference in how they perform. But if you're just starting out and you're not really sure if painting in watercolor is something that you want to invest in, there is no harm in just getting a student set like this. So this is the Winsor & Newton Cotman, I think probably 12 pan set. I'll link in the description bar below. It is a very basic palette. It comes in this nice little lightweight container that's good for traveling around with. It came with a water brush as well. It's somewhere lost in the depths of my stash. I don't use it anymore anyway. But yeah, it comes with all the kind of basic colors you need: red, oranges, yellows, greens, blues, purples, for you to start. And if you're new and you're not sure if painting is something that is for you, this is a good way to experiment. You've got all the basic colors you'll need to start painting whatever it is you want. I will also say what I noticed as well is that as you paint, you'll kind of figure out what your preferences are color-wise. So if you look at this palette, I don't know if you can see. So this is a Winsor & Newton professional palette. It fits 24 pans. I may have squeezed a few more in. It came with 18 pans to begin with, and I added a bunch more. I don't know if you can see, but almost half my palette is green. I really like greens. I also, so when I added more pans to this, I added a ton more shades of green. I really like painting with lots of green. Another thing I kind of noticed as I was painting was that actually between kind of red shades, I don't actually like using red. I do have reds, because occasionally I do use them, but generally speaking, I prefer using pinks and rose colors. So I wouldn't necessarily invest in a huge palette straight away, largely because, you know, those are the kinds of things you'll want to explore as you continue on your watercolor journey. So I'd pick up a small set, maybe something like this if you're just starting out. I mean, this is good enough for you to get an idea. And as you go along, you can consider whether or not you want to invest in something more artist quality like this, or, you know, try out different brands, because you will notice that, you know, different brands perform slightly differently. So even colors that use the same pigments, have the same name, from brand to brand will look a little bit different. So yep, if you're first starting out, just pick out a basic palette like this. It'll be good enough to get you going and get you started. Next, you'll need something to paint on. So let's talk about paper. Now, if you're going to be doing watercolors, please, 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 please make sure you get watercolor paper. If you don't get watercolor paper, it's going to buckle, it's going to warp, your paint's just going to glide all over it, and you'll be pretty disappointed and discouraged if you're first starting out. So at least invest in some student quality watercolor paper if you don't want to splurge on the more kind of expensive watercolor blocks. So here, what I'm showing here are just 3 different pads that I have at home. I've got way more than this, but this will give you an idea of the different types of options you have when it comes to paper. So this is a Canson Mixed Media XL notebook. If you've been following me on Instagram, you'll be very familiar with this. It's one I use all the time. This is an Arteza A5 notebook, and this is an Arches block. So I'll kind of walk you through some of the things you want to think about when it comes to paper. So these two I would consider kind of like student quality. They're made from trees, like most paper. The weight I usually go for is 300 grams per meter squared, or 140 pounds. A weight refers to kind of just how thick the paper is. You kind of want a good thickness so that it can really absorb the water for the watercolor. This is for mixed media. It's been designed for mixed media, so it's good for a lot of different techniques, though I mostly do this for watercolor, sometimes for gouache. And it comes on as a pad with perforated sheets that you can remove the sheets if you want, though I almost never do. So yeah, this is good for, you know, sketching and trying new things. So that's the Canson Mixed Media notebook. This is the Arteza A5 notebook. I only got this recently and just started using it recently, but I like it actually. This is also for watercolor and mixed media, if you can see there. Now here actually you can see something more about the paper is referred to as cold press paper. When you're looking at watercolor paper, you can see probably a range of different types of press, if you will. This really refers to the texture of the paper. For beginners, I would recommend cold press. The other finishes out there are rough and hot press. Cold press is probably easiest to work with when you're first starting out. It's also sometimes referred to as not. Don't really know why. The rough is kind of what it sounds like. It's pretty rough texture. And the hot press is smoother. So when I first started, I made the mistake of getting the hot press because I thought, you know, smooth is better. I don't know what I was thinking. It was really difficult to work with. I think hot press in general is more for kind of finer detail or even gouache painting. Not really kind of loose floral / you know, if you want to do loose landscapes, because that uses quite a lot of water. So you're going to want something like cold press that can help kind of absorb some of that. So this is the Arteza A5. Yeah, so I've just been using it for the last week or so. I like it so far. It's pretty good for the price point. So if you're starting out, this is a good option. Then lastly here, you've got an Arches watercolor block. This is the artist level quality, so to speak. This is made rather from trees. It's made from 100% cotton. So that makes the paper more absorbent and makes the gives you a little more time to work with the paints, and they kind of behave a bit differently on cotton paper as well. This is more expensive than the kind of student quality, so you know, I generally save this for pieces that I'm planning to potentially turn to prints or that I'm going to gift or sell. So this is a watercolor block, which means it comes with the sides kind of glued down like this. This helps the water, prevent the water from warping or buckling if you use a lot of water. So it kind of keeps the paper stretched out. So as you paint with it, you know, it stays kind of firm. Now, if you're gonna use a watercolor block, you will also need something like this, a palette knife, to kind of remove it, which I didn't know the first time I got one. So got home, didn't know how to cut it out, and had to run back to the store to buy a palette knife like this. I mean, I think you can use other things as well, but I would recommend a palette knife so you don't ruin the other paper, which I have done before. So, and that made me cry because this paper is very expensive. So yeah, look, if you're first starting out, I think something like this Arteza A5 notebook is great. If you want to kind of paint in a slightly larger format, you can go for an A4. I kind of find A4 a bit daunting at times, quite a big piece of paper. But yeah, one of these two are great. I really like using them. And then, you know, if you are building up, you can eventually go up to using one of these bad boys. You definitely don't need these at the start. Right now, so let's look at brushes. Here I've got an assortment from my stash, just kind of to illustrate the different types of brushes there are. So on the left-hand side, I've got 3 round brushes in different sizes. This is a mop brush, this is a flat wash brush, this is a fan brush, and this is an oval wash brush. They all do slightly different things. They're used for different things. So for example, the flat wash brush is good for painting large surfaces with one color, or multiple colors if you will. And a fan brush is good for adding some texture. But if you're first starting out, all you probably really need is an assortment of round brushes in different sizes. They're probably the most flexible in terms of usage, and they are the ones actually I use the most day to day. So if you're starting out, yes, that's what I would recommend, an assortment of round brushes with different sizing depending on, you know, how big of a scale you want to paint in. So here I've got a Winsor & Newton Cotman, a Princeton Neptune, and a Winsor & Newton Sable brush. They all have slightly different fibers which perform a bit differently. So these two are synthetic. The Princeton Neptune is a synthetic squirrel, so it kind of mimics how squirrel behaves, and this is Sable. Between Sable and Squirrel, I would say Squirrel holds a lot more water, holds a lot more paint, and is a little softer probably, whereas the Sable is a little firmer, has a little more flex, a little more snap. So when you kind of paint with it, it's a little more springy. I prefer Sable probably, between Sable and Squirrel. I find Squirrel a little bit soft. It's kind of not what I'm really used to. But if you're first starting out, like, you know, I started with this Winsor & Newton Cotman set, so something like that, some synthetic one like that. The Princeton Heritage is also a very good line that you could use. I personally don't have it, but I think it's meant to be a synthetic Sable, so you know, that would be a good place to start. My favorite is this Series 7. I get asked a lot about which brushes I use, and this is the one I use the most. So this is a Series 7 size 4. I have a set of 1, 2, 3, 4. They're a little more expensive because they are actual Sable. Again, if you're starting out, you don't need that. I started with the Winsor & Newton Cotman set that came with like a 1, 4, 6, which was plenty to get started with. What you really want, you know, with your brushes is to make sure they have a good point, so you can, you know, paint with a bit of detail if you want to, and that they have a good kind of bend. You know, you don't want it to be too soft. If it's too soft, you're not going to be able to kind of do all the different techniques that you're going to want to with watercolor. So that's it for this video. Hopefully you learned a little bit more about watercolor paints, watercolor paper and the different types of brushes you can use. The next thing to do would be actually start using them. So you can learn how your paint behaves, how your paper responds, and how your brush works. Because all the different combinations work slightly differently. That'll be part 2 of the series, getting to know your paints, which will be coming soon on this channel. So if you like this, please like and subscribe so you can see when the next videos are available. So thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you all soon. Bye!